Hello, everyone.
All the kids and the teachers.
Glad you could join us. I'm Mary June. I'm president of the Chippewa County Historical Society. And I'm glad you all braved our cold evening. Although we lucked out, it's almost balmy compared to the weather we've had lately. I just wanted to mention that I don't know if you saw our most recent river soundings, but in it we've got an article talking about our upcoming year. It's sort of an important year for us because we'll be celebrating our 95th anniversary of the Chippewa County Historical Society. We started in March of 1919, and so we're going to be having a number of, one particular big event that we're planning for this summer, and then we will do couple different little things during the year. But I hope you'll join us as we celebrate it.
Good evening. I'm Susan James. I'm Vice President for Programs and Publications with the Chippewa County Historical Society, and also Library Manager here at Bayless and Assistant Director of the Superior District Library. That's a lot. But I have some thank yous, and I wanted to mention some events coming up. Of course, we want to thank Ed Coivisto for speaking here tonight. Thank you very much. And Carol in person, Jim Dwyer, Mary June, and Ginny Zimbalist for help with setup and refreshments. Ed Coivisto has been interested in Civil War history since he was a child. He participated in our summer history camp last year and gave a great program. In commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, we've invited him to speak to us. Tonight he'll tell us about how weapons were used at the Battle of Gettysburg. Please welcome Ed Coivisto.
Good evening. Well, it's exciting to be here. I usually talk about uniforms a little bit later on in the program, but I'm getting hot. Okay, as she said, right now is the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. 50 years ago, when I was a little kid, I really became interested in it. How this happened is Life magazine. You probably remember that big magazine. For every event on the 100-year anniversary, they would have something in there. I became just fascinated with this, and I started reading everything I could on the Civil War. Well, for me, this was a real big event because I was dyslexic, and I really had a hard time reading, and I'd have to look at every word. And my mother saw me interested in reading, and she did something that most mothers would never do for a kid. She got me a muzzle loader. Our neighbor had found his own muzzle loader in a log cabin, and my mother knew she had it. And she tried to buy it from him, but he wouldn't sell it. And he said, well, you paint me a picture, I'll trade you. So my mother got me this old Civil War gun when I was just a little kid. That became my prized possession. I mean, that thing was bigger than I was. But I still have the gun today. So that's how I got interested in weapons and the Civil War. But what really keyed it, ending up with so many things, I worked for United Parcel Service. And as fate would have it, I delivered to Tony's gun shop. Well, Tony was selling me old junk Civil War guns for $25. I wish I would have bought 100 of them because parts are so expensive now. I also bought pistols, like this one right here. 30 years ago, you could buy something like this for $350. Now they're worth almost $2,000. You can say, well, for me, that was just a real good investment, not because I made money on it, because I got to play with it for so long. Whenever I pick up a Civil War gun or anything like that, the first thing I say is, I wonder who owned this gun. I wonder what this gun saw. I'm always interested in the guns. But when I'm talking today, I'm not really going to emphasize, I'm going to talk about my guns. When I talk to kids, I try to inspire them to read. But when I talk to adults, I want to clarify different aspects of a battle. So you know what a volley is, you know what flanking is. So if you read a Civil War book, that's my thing, I'm trying to get you to read Civil War books, so you have a better idea on what's happening during a battle. Because a lot of people read about the Civil War, but they don't have any idea how a battle took place. So I'm going to give you a few basics first. Now, a smooth bore musket has smooth bore, of course. It's just like a big shotgun. Effective range is only 50 yards at one person, 100 yards at a whole line of people. So they're not very accurate, and for the maximum range is 200 yards, but when you shot it at 200 yards, you really didn't know where it was going to go. Now a rifled musket, like this one right here, has rifling in it. Now the rifling makes it a lot more accurate. An average shooter could easily shoot at 200 yards. A good shot could easily shoot at 500 yards. Now I know you're going to say, well, you can't even see someone at 500 yards. Of course, you would be shooting at a bunch of people, but it still had a lot of power at 500 yards. Now one thing I want to show you is how to load a gun, but first, you kept your shells. This right here is a cartridge box. You carry this with a band going around your side like this, and this is what determined how long you're going to be on the battlefield. They usually kept about 50 paper rounds in them. Sometimes you hear of troopers having 60 rounds. I don't know how they fit them in there. Now, a paper round is like this. The easiest way to explain it is you take a penny roll. Everybody knows where pennies go when you roll them up. You put a big hunk of lead in it, tie a string on the end, and then put 60 grains of powder in the other end and then fold it over. That's basically a paper round. And I'm going to show you how to load a musket. Now, you have your gun like this. You reach into your cartridge box, which is on your side, and they're made heavy duty. They got two big flaps. The flaps are to keep the rain out, and there's a little metal trays inside that you put your shells in, because you could march miles and miles, and if they were just sitting in there, they'd fall apart by the time you got to the battle. So anyways, you put all the cartridge out of your cartridge box, you take it like this, you rip off the folded part, you pour the powder down the barrel, and with the rifled musket, you take the lead out of the paper, stick it into the barrel, bring out your ramrod, ram the round down the barrel. Sounds easy. You bring your gun up to half cock, and there's a nipple right here. You pull a little cap out of your cap box. So I think I've got one right here. This is your cap box. They have a little cap that's round and it goes on top of your nipple. You pull out a cap, you put it on your nipple, bring it to full cock, and you get ready to aim. And of course, some officer will say fire, and when a whole group of guys fire, it's a volley. Everybody fires at once. The reason I did that is because a lot of times there'd be a lot of smoke on the battlefield if there wasn't any wind, so it could get very hard to see. So that's what a volley was. Now, the smoothbore musket is loaded exactly the same way, except when you put the powder down in there, you didn't take the paper off the shell. Those shells were round, and you used the paper that was around the shell as wadding. You push the whole thing down the barrel. Now, there's a couple advantages. Of course, the rifled musket's going to shoot a lot farther. But what can happen? Black powder is very dirty. These mini balls just fit down the barrel. After you shot them a few times, they could get jammed in the barrel. Now, they had a special shell with a zinc disc on the back, and you jam that down the barrel and you could clean it. But a lot of times, I'm going to give you two examples. One guy, I forget his name, he was in a battle. He fired his gun 12 times. Of course, the 13th time he's loading his gun and he gets the round stuck in it. He was shot in the leg, and that was the end of his battle. Ben Hurst, the sergeant, he's in the Battle of Gettysburg, and he gets a round stuck in his barrel. He can't get the ramrod down any farther. What he does is what you ordinarily wouldn't do. He pulls his ramrod out, he's laying on the ground, he lays his gun on a fence post, he takes his shoelace off, ties it around the trigger and pulls it. Why did he get away from it? He was scared that that barrel was going to blow up and injure himself. Now, you'd think, well, how many times can this happen? After the Battle of Gettysburg, they found 24,000 guns on the battlefield that had rounds stuck in them. So it happened a lot. You had to keep them clean. And the other advantage with the smoothbore one it didn't clog up as much because that paper wadding would let you jam the round down easier. Now, if you were an officer, would you want your gun to shoot this far like the smoothbore, or would you want it to shoot this far? Of course, an average officer would want their gun to shoot 4 times farther, and they would want a rifled musket. The one big difference for this, well, one group of guys that didn't like this were the Irish Brigade. Now, the Irish Brigade kept the smoothbore musket. Now, you're going to say, why would they keep that smoothbore musket? Well, they shot a different round. Instead of one piece in here, they had a ball and buckshot. Every time they shot their gun, they shot 4 rounds out. I'm going to give you an example. The Battle of Antietam, there's the sunken road. The Confederates, you know, they're probably up to their waist, so their body's hid, and there's a fence there. They can lay their gun on that fence and shoot the Federals when they come over the hill. And they beat off several divisions. They'd line up on this hill 100 yards away, and of course the Confederates would shoot them because their bodies were hidden and they were kind of behind a fence. But now all of a sudden, the Irish Brigade comes up. They get to that hill, here's the sunken road, they get to that hill and they keep marching. There just happens to be a slight dip in the field so the Confederates can't shoot at them. And when they come up, they're less than 50 yards away. Now, this is where the advantage goes to the Irish Brigade, because every time they shoot their guns, there's got 4 balls heading for the Confederates. And then always after that, the sunken road is known as Bloody Lane because there was so much carnage in that little road. The Irish Brigade does not chase the Confederates out. They run out of ammo and march off, and the next brigade comes in and pushes them out of the sunken road. But everybody realized that it was the Irish Brigade that pushed them out of there. Now that's for the guns. If you ever watch a Civil War show, you see these guys lining up across from each other. If you think about that, that made no sense. Why would you line up across from the people and shoot it out? Well, the early 1800s, Napoleon just had success after success over in Europe. So all the manuals told you that was the way to do it. Now, the advantage, what you tried to do is when you were lined up, you always tried to have more men. If this side has 100 and this side has 120 guys, you would try to flank them. You'd like have 10 guys shooting at one, so you'd try to get on their ends. That's always a flanking move. And during the Battle of Gettysburg, I'll give you a couple examples how this happened. So if you have less men, people with more would try to get on the edge of you. They got 10 shooting against one, pretty soon 12 against one, and they can roll up your end. That's a flanking move. Now, what job do you think they gave the bravest man? This is a hint.
Flag carrier.
The flag carrier. Now, when you first think of that, you're going to say, get that guy in the back who can't see. You know, he can't hit the broad side of the barn. Well, I'm going to give you an example. We've got, I'm the Union. The Confederates are attacking you. Now, there are more and more Confederates coming, and you're starting to get flanked, and you're going to get overrun. And you're looking down at your officer down there, your general, to do something. All of a sudden, you hear a bugle call to charge. And you look down there, and that was the wrong thing. You didn't want to hear a charge, you wanted to hear a retreat. A couple minutes later, the bugle call is going for retreat. Well, obviously, the first part of the war, both sides had the same bugle calls because they'd been the same army earlier than that. So you'd have a complete mess. You'd have half the guys charging, half the guys retreating. So they finally realized that that wasn't the best thing to do. They had to have somebody, they said the sturdiest man, basically the bravest man. When the officer wanted the company to go forward, he had the flag carrier. Whenever you look down your line, you could always see that flag. If that flag was going forward, you were expected to go forward. If that flag was going backwards, you could retreat in honor. Now, honor in the 1800s is a lot different than it is now. Robert E. Lee said once, "I will sacrifice everything but honor." And people would rather die than lose their honor. It's hard for us to realize that nowadays, but it was the most important thing to them. Now, I'm wearing my uniform. I usually wear it for kids, even though I knew there weren't going to be any kids here, I still had to wear it. Now, as you can see, I'm a Union. First parts of the war, Union could be wearing gray, Confederates could be wearing blue. A lot of them had bright red and white zouave uniforms with a beanie on their head and like bloomer things. They're really funny. And there was a lot of zouave uniforms. And the sharpshooters, Berden's sharpshooters, wore a green uniform. Now this is a cavalry because it's yellow. If these stripes were red, I could have the same uniform on, but if it was red, I'd be artillery. Or if it was blue on blue, I'd be infantry. One other way of telling, if a hat has sabers, it's cavalry. If it has crossed cannons, it's artillery. And if it has the bugle, it's infantry. Now, those are the basics for getting started. Now, I want to start talking about the Battle of Gettysburg. Put these down, take off my jacket before I get too hot, pass out. Now, yes.
Excuse me, what rank are you?
Sergeant, Major, Sergeant.
Oh, okay.
So it's a sergeant's uniform. Now, the Battle of Gettysburg. I want to talk about that mainly. Now, Hooker's first in charge when the Confederates start moving north. Now, Hooker sees all the troops heading north. He's got his cavalry out there, they're bringing him back messages. He looks, I can finally take Richmond. He's on the telegraph telling Abraham Lincoln, I can take Richmond. Abraham Lincoln, why? He said, all the Confederates are moving north. Well, that kind of throws a red flag to Abraham Lincoln, but Hooker really doesn't think it's no big deal if they take Washington. Well, Hooker still thinks he can take Richmond, but he does eventually get listening to Lincoln. He starts moving his troops north, but he's about 4 or 5 days behind him. Abraham Lincoln by this time is pretty upset. He puts Meade in charge. Now, Meade tells them to put Reynolds in charge, but Reynolds had already said that he doesn't want the job, because you know how many commanders they've already gone through. And could you imagine taking that position after losing about every battle? Now the Confederates are going through Pennsylvania, and you got to go up there and catch them. Could you imagine the pressure that was on him? Well, what he does, the only thing he can do is start marching north. And he sends out his cavalry. Luckily, by 1863, the cavalry that the Union has is starting to get better. The first 2 years, the cavalry was only used for running messages back and forth. But Stuart has had so much good luck running around the Union lines, the Union has finally realized that they've got to have a better cavalry force. And at the time, they send Buford forward. Now, Buford gets to Gettysburg. The people are all excited. The Confederates were here a couple days ago. They took my cows. And when Buford's there, he sees a patrol of Confederates just north of town. So he sends out pickets all the way around town. Now, when he's in town, he's looking around and he sees these beautiful hills behind him. He says, holy man, if the Confederates come up there, set up on those hills, the Union's going to come in late and have to push them off those hills, and we're going to lose another major battle. Now, the Union's lost almost all the major battles up to this point, except for the Western Theater. Now, you're probably thinking, well, is this battle that important? I think it's one of the most important battles. Why? Because the Confederates are moving north. The Confederates aren't trying to win the war. They're trying to make the war long enough so the Union quits fighting. They can't beat them. And they also want the French and English to step in and put an end to the war. So this battle is really important. Even though they're winning battles in the south, if they could win a big battle up north, it could make a big difference. Now, Buford has his men out there. First morning, of course, July 1st, the Confederates start coming into town. They don't know what they're coming in town for. They think that they're going up on those hills. Actually, the Confederates are going in because they hear that there's a supply of shoes in Gettysburg. Well, now, the Confederate infantry has the cavalry outnumbered. Now, the cavalry have a couple advantages. First advantage is the Confederates don't know that it's a real army there. They think it's militia. Secondly, Buford gets to pick the ground that the fighting's going to be on. And third, he's got all his men have Sharps carbines in saddlebags full of ammo. I'm going to show you in a minute. Now, as the Confederates come in, there's big rock fences. Buford sets up his men behind this, and he has his horses hid. So the Confederates march in like they own the place. Big battle takes place. The Confederates fall back, bring more men in. The battle goes back and forth. Now, every time it starts getting tight for the cavalry, every fourth man in the cavalry holds the horses. So every time it starts getting really bad, they ride up the horses, they jump on the horses, fall back to the next good position. Now the Confederates have to march back up and set up, and this fight goes on for 2 hours, but the Union keeps having the advantage because they can always pick, they have like big rock fences there. And now I want to show you the advantage. Remember, when you load the musket, you have to stand up and load it. Now, with the Sharps carbine, here's my rock wall, you can stay behind the rock wall and your body's protected. What you did, you dropped this down, opening up the breech. With the breech, the round for putting in this is different than that paper round. I'm going to explain it like a cigarette. The lead being the filter and the tobacco being the powder. And when they stuck it in here, you lifted this up and it cut the back of the shell off, exposing the powder. You cocked it, capped it, and fired. You could shoot about 10 rounds a minute. With musket, you can only shoot 3 rounds a minute. Even though there's less cavalry, they have more firepower. This is where the Spencer or the Sharps carbine saves the day. Now, Buford knows he can't keep the Confederates out of town forever. He knows the 1st Corps, 1st Brigade is coming up. Drink water. I'm talking too fast. Excuse me. Now, the 1st Corps is coming up. Who's in the 1st Corps? It's the Iron Brigade. The Iron Brigade has the 24th Michigan. Now, the Union troops are glad to be in Pennsylvania. They go through little towns. Girls come running out and giving them water. When they're down south, nobody likes them. But when they're going through Pennsylvania, it lifts their spirits. They're glad to be there. People come out and give them drinks of water and everything. Now, Reynolds, the person that they wanted to run the army, but Meade had to take it. Now he's bringing the 1st Corps in. He goes up to Buford, and he hollers up to Buford, you know, what's going on? And Buford yells something to, we're going to have the devil to pay today. And then Reynolds says, you think you can hold him? And he says, I reckon I can. So now he's running the 1st Corps up there. The 24th Michigan actually loses 4 guys from heat stroke. They die from running to get in that. So you know that they knew this was important. It wasn't just another battle. This was a battle on the northern soil, and they wanted to win it. Now, when they first get there, Reynolds is up on his horse. He's directing the Iron Brigade along. One shot goes out. Boom, he gets shot right in the head. Falls off his horse dead. Now, a lot of books will show this guy up in a tree with a scoped rifle shooting. That's very unlikely. They didn't let those really good rifles go out into the woods like that. They used them in the base trench warfare. They did have them though. To be a good shot in the Civil War, I'm going by Burden's Sharpshooters. Standing up with your musket, you had to be able to shoot 10 shots into a 10-inch circle at 100 yards. With a rest, leaning against a tree or a table, you had to be able to shoot 10 shots into a 10-inch circle at 200 yards. 200 yards is a long shot. That's 2 football fields. So you know that the Confederates had really good shooters too. And I'm assuming that that was just a good shot, saw this guy riding, the only one he could see, and he shoots him in the head. That's how, and Reynolds is the highest ranking officer that died during the Civil War. He's a 2-star general. And now you're gonna say, wow, there's a big difference in shooting too. The Confederates are basically rural area. The northern units, a lot of them are from like New York, Philadelphia, all these big cities. When you're from the south, if you wanted meat, you got your gun, you went out in the woods, shot a squirrel, a turkey, a rabbit, they shot something. Now if you lived in a big city, you had no use for a gun. You might have a pistol for protection. But when you got done working at some mill, you went and bought your food. A big difference. And one of the things that I still can't believe is when you went into the service, you never practiced with your rifles. You think it would be the first thing you did, have lots of target practice, but they never had target practice. So troops would come from the big cities and they wouldn't know how to shoot a gun. Most of the Confederates, the first part of the war, were good shots. It was a little bit of an advantage they had for them. Okay, now we got Reynolds getting shot. Now the Iron Brigade has really good success pushing the Confederates back. But what's going to happen? The Confederates are already there. More and more Confederates are coming in. What's going to happen? They're going to get flanked. They're going to get surrounded. 24th Michigan is out there, and they're fighting the 26th North Carolina. There's more men surrounding the 24th Michigan all the time, but the 24th Michigan keeps falling back. And there's a little creek, they say a hop and a jump, you can cross it, but there was an opening. The 24th Michigan shot down 3 other color bearers in that little creek. As the battle goes on, the Confederates lose all 9 of their color bearers. The 24th Michigan also loses all 9 of theirs. But for the Confederates, a captain picks up the flag and keeps going. He's shot. A lieutenant picks up the flag and keeps going. He's finally shot. A colonel picks up the flag, but a private runs over and he says, "No colonel of mine will carry the flag when I'm alive." He gets shot. The colonel gets shot. Now the battle's been going on all day. Finally, the lieutenant colonel carries the flag and he's killed. They lose 14 color bearers. Now, of course, the 24th Michigan's not much luckier. They lose all their color bearers, and one of them dies holding the flag upright. And when they find the flag, it's still standing there, and the color bearer's dead. Now, our Major Colonel Morrow with the 24th Michigan, he takes the flag and he's rallying his men. He's swinging it back and forth. He gets shot in the head. He falls over and his men think he's dead, but he was only knocked out and he's captured. But finally, this battle's been going on with the Iron Brigade from 10 o'clock, and they keep backing up and backing up. They started the battle with 497 men. They ended up with, I think, 99 men. They lost 80% of their men in this battle. So just terrible how many men they lost. But they finally, now they're not trying to win. What are they trying to do? They're trying to keep those Confederates from getting up in those hills. They sacrificed themselves for that. And now all the time, more and more Union troops are coming up and they're setting up on those hills. Here's the big what-if of the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, Stonewall Jackson was probably the best Corps commander. He was killed the year before. Chancellorsville. He was out patrolling at night and he comes back into his own line and his own men shoot him. He dies. So now he is used to taking general orders from Lee. I'm going to give you an example that happens later. Lee would say, "Take that hill if practical," and he would go up there and he wouldn't hesitate. He would attack the hill. He would have his brigades. "I want this brigade to go up this side of the hill and attack, and I want this brigade to go around this side, and when the 3rd brigade, I want you to wait until those 2 are engaged and then you attack." Well, Ewell takes his place. Ewell is used to exact orders. He's used to Stonewall Jackson giving him exact orders. Now Lee is used to giving general orders. He tells them, take that hill if practical. Well, he rides out there, his men are out of water, they're getting low on ammo, and he can see cannons and men setting up on that hill. He hesitates. Everybody knows he should have gone, but he didn't. Basically, that was a big, big advantage for the North, because a lot of the Confederates are already there. There's 10 roads going into Gettysburg. The Confederates are all around it, and they're just pouring in. And the Union troops are coming in one at a time. So that was the big advantage for the Union. We're in the Battle of Gettysburg. Now that's the end of the first day, and the main advantage that they did was set up that really good defensive line on top of those hills that's faced like a fish hook. I'm talking too fast. Now, we're going to go to the second day. I'm going to talk about citizen soldiers. One really good, one really bad. Sickles is in charge, I forget what corps it was now, I forget what corps it is, but he's in charge of a complete corps. He's not a West Point guy, but he's in charge of this corps because he's so good at getting the Irish to join the army. He gets hundreds or thousands of people to join the army, so they put him in command of this. It's not a really good idea if you don't keep an eye on him. Now, all the high ground, there's one bad spot, and they stick him in that bad spot. He goes up to Meade. I've got bad ground here. I need better ground. Meade kind of ignores him, and he wants Meade to come and check it out. He doesn't. He sees nice high ground out in front of him. Here's one thing that always baffles me. They always talk about good ground, and they usually want it high. I can see an advantage where if you're charging up the hill, you have to run uphill, and if you're up high, you can see down better, but they always talk about good ground. And it's kind of, I guess I have to get to Gettysburg to see this. So anyways, he goes out a half mile out in front. What's going to happen? Of course, he's going to get flanked on both sides. See, now I'm going to have you knowing just as much as those generals. They're going to go out there a half a mile too far. What's going to happen? He's going to get attacked from 3 sides. He's getting flanked from both sides. He sends in brigade after brigade. They're all fighting in the wheat field. Now, Confederates had come in from this side, the Union. It finally gets known as a whirlpool of death because there's so much going on in this wheat field. Unfortunately, the 4th Michigan ends up there. Now, Jefferson Harrison is in charge of the 4th Michigan. He's fighting back and forth. He's going up and down his line, rallying his men. Come on, men, we can do it, we can do it. All of a sudden, he looks back off to his left, and he sees the Confederates getting ready to capture his flag. He runs over there with his sword. Instead of stopping and getting a couple guys, he runs over there and stabs the guy holding the flag. And I can just see him reaching down to pick up that flag, and he gets stabbed by a bayonet. Here he's a famous Michigan history. Here's a picture. This is a beautiful painting. I tried to buy that painting, but it's really expensive. That's Harrison Jefferson, and he dies trying to save his flag. Now, if that was me, I don't think I would have run over there. But back in the day, that flag meant everything. That flag stood for your country. That flag stood for your men you were fighting for. When you were fighting out in the field like that, you weren't really fighting for the president or the country. You were fighting for your men, and that stood for your men. He did not want to lose that flag, and he gave his life up trying to get it. Well, his men do come and save the flag and carry his body off the field. The last 3 things he says is mother, 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 and he dies. Okay, now Sickles is the one who got him into this mess. Sickles is up on his horse. Cannonball comes and shoots him, rips off his leg. A Union officer says, "Thank God. That's going to save a lot of Union lives." Now, that's kind of brutal to say about another one of your officers. Okay, now that's a citizen soldier. That didn't do a very good job. All the way down to the left of the line, another one's going to perform admirably. Now, General Governor Warren, he's checking out the lines, and he can see this nice hill up on the top. The theory said that he shoots a cannonball over in that area, and he sees movement. Actually, the Confederates were on their way up to that hill, so he grabs the nearest corps and he rushes them up to that, and it's a little round top. The ones up in front are the 20th Maine. The 16th Michigan is with them, but they're on the other end of the line. Now, as soon as they get there, the fighting almost is already, you can already see the Confederates coming up. Now, this battle goes back and forth, back and forth. What's going to happen? Of course, the first thing they do is they try to flank him. He's got to march his men around the mountain so he doesn't get flanked. Now what's going to happen? He's going to run out of ammo. It always happens. Okay, now he's way in the heck out there. The last thing the general told him, you must hold this position to the last man. Now he's sitting there, his officers, the battle's been going on and on, his men are running out of ammo, his lieutenants and sergeants are coming out of ammo. What does he do? He can't sit there. He knows if the Confederates keep coming up and you don't shoot at them, they're going to know that you don't have any ammo. He gives the command, fix bayonets. Now, he's got his men around the mountain over here. He can't just run down the mountain because the Confederates will know that they're desperate. So he lets the Confederates come up. Now, he swings the guys down the hill like a gate. Now, if you're a Confederate going up the hill fighting this guy, all of a sudden you see a bunch of Union guys coming from the side, the first thing you're going to think is, they got reinforcements, we're getting flanked. The Confederates run down the hill. Joshua Chamberlain's gets more prisoners than he has men. He actually saves the day, possibly saves the battle, and possibly the United States. Now, he saves the battle because that hill, the Confederates were trying to get up there. If they would have got up there, they could have had cannons up there. They could have held that position with very few men, and they could have shot cannons right down the line, continuously shooting Union troops. So the position was very important. Okay, that's basically it for the second day. But I will say one more thing for Joshua Chamberlain, one of my big heroes. The Battle of Petersburg. He's rallying his men. Come on, men. His color sergeant goes down. He picks up the flag and he's, come on, men. And he gets shot through the hip somehow. I don't know where your spleen is, but they nick his spleen. He falls down, or no, he puts a sword in the ground and holds the flag until his men go by, and then he collapses. His brother brings him to see the doctor. The first doctor says, well, he's dead. That's a mortal wound. There's nothing they can do. His brother doesn't give up. He finds another doctor, a Maine doctor, and he operates on him all night long and saves his life. And after that, Joshua Chamberlain comes back into the war like 5 months later, and really, you know, he's one of the best generals the Union has. Now, okay, that's the second day of Gettysburg. Now we're going to go, I hope I'm not taking too much time here. Now, we're going to go into the third day, Picketts Charge. But before Picketts Charge, I'm going to talk a little bit about cavalry. Now, way off 2.5 miles, 3 miles south of Picketts Charge, there's a big cavalry fight. Now, the Union has, up in the high ground, they can see this big cloud leaving town. Well, they know it's cavalry. There's like 5,000 cavalry. They try to sneak in behind the Union. Now, Jeb Stuart's in charge of the cavalry. He is the prince of the Confederacy. But when he's at Gettysburg, he gets there 2 days late. He's out riding around the Union line looking for glory. And he gets stuck way out and he can't get back to report to Lee. And Lee's mad. Now, Stuart, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Confederate Cavalry. You're going to say they are always better the first 2 years. You're going to say, now why would their cavalry be better? If you were a slave owner before the Civil War, no matter how many you had to provide people to look for runaways every night. If you only had maybe a dozen, maybe you only had to go out once a week. If you had 50, maybe twice a week. If you had hundreds, you might have to have somebody riding around every night. Now the Confederates, without even knowing it, already have a Confederate force. They've got thousands of guys riding around every night. I can't imagine riding a horse around all night long, but they already had a cavalry force in place. They already had their own weapons. They had their horses. Now, one thing that when I read, they say that the thoroughbred horses were a lot better. Now, you can tell on a race or something they have thoroughbred horses, and I'm going to give you one example. About a day or so before the Battle of Gettysburg, Stuart is out riding around. He meets up with the Michigan. They take off after him. He's almost captured, but there's this big ravine. Stuart's horse jumps over it, whereas the Michigan cavalry horses wouldn't make that jump. They all balked at it. So that's the only time I've heard or realized that a thoroughbred horse in that circumstance could save your life. And that is supposed to be one of the reasons why they were better cavalry. Okay, now, Stuart's riding around trying to sneak into the back of the Union line. What's he trying to do? He knows that Picketts Charge is going to attack the middle of the line. He probably wants to get in behind him so that he can disturb it, bring guys off the front line, creating an opening in the battle line. Who does he meet? First of all, he sends out about 1,000 guys fighting on foot. Now, he wants to draw the Union forces into that mess. He has 3,000 guys on their horses that want to charge in. But the Union already knows because they've seen that big cloud of dust and they got guys up in the mountain that know it. Well, guess who's there? George Armstrong Custer. He had orders to be all the way at the other end of it, but he knew something big was going to happen. He goes up to the commander and he says, if you give me orders to stay, I'll stay. He's looking for glory, of course. He wants to get into battles. Now, they have skirmishes all along there. All of a sudden, Stuart brings out about 3,000 men on horses. There's like 2,000 of Custer's men. What happens is they charge into each other at full speed. Horses were hitting each other, flipping over backwards. The battle goes back and forth. You can imagine 5,000 guys with sabers and guns and everything firing. Now, the first thing they do is empty their pistols. Now, and their muskets. Now, when you're on a horseback, you cannot reload a pistol. Everybody thinks, well, just reload your pistol. Not that easy. Now, here's a pistol, 1860 Colt. Now, when I want to load this, I have to reach back into this little pack back here and get a package of 5 shells out. What you would do, take that package apart, take out one shell. It's like a little cigarette with a piece of lead and lead, or a piece of powder and lead. You'd stick one down that chamber, you'd take this, push it down, put it back up, turn the cylinder, put another one in, push it down. You do that 6 times. Take one of those little things in there. So it was almost impossible to load a pistol on a horse. So once they shot their guns off, they were pretty much done. Now, the Confederates get off their horses to fight because they want to reload their guns. Battle goes back and forth, but now Custer has this newfangled weapon. It's a Spencer. Usually cavalry use Spencer carbines. These ones, this is one of the first ones that come out. It's a Spencer rifle. Now, when they're on their horses, what they can do, take this out, put it in their hand, reach it. They have another ammo box that has little tubes. You took that tube, you slid the rounds down the barrel, 7 rounds. You took this, put it back in, took the lever, your gun was loaded. Now you could shoot 7 shots and you could reload it on a horse. Now you can see where there's a big advantage. You have some poor Confederate with his carbine. He's got to get off his horse, put a round down there, pull out his ramrod, load his gun. Now, can you imagine how demoralizing that is to see that other guy sitting on his horse, put 7 rounds in and attack you? Now, Custer's men are the first ones to defeat Stuart. They run them off the battlefield. They get to a little fence. Custer's men have to get off their horses to knock down the fence to pursue them. So that's basically what happens in the cavalry battle. Now we're finally getting to Picketts Charge. Now there's a lot of things that a lot of people don't know about Picketts Charge either. Now, there's 150 guns on the Confederate side and I think 88 on the Union side. The first thing they do is open up on them with the cannons. Now, here's the Union troops, here's the cannons. What they want is the cannon to go off maybe 50 yards in front of the troops, explode, and fly into them, sending shrapnel. They were exploding shells. They had little fuses in the back of the shells. So they would shoot it, hope it would go off right in front of them, and just spray the troops. What happened? They had new fuses. The new fuses were going off over their heads, and all the shrapnel was flying past the guys laying behind the fences. Now, they always put their caissons, the Union, back about 50 yards to carry the ammo back in case it blew up. It wouldn't kill the guys in the cannons. Now, all those shells were flying farther back, blowing those caissons up. The Confederates are a mile away. Every time one of those blows up, they think they're doing a really good job, but almost all the rounds are going too far. So that hurt Lee's big advantage of having all the cannons. Now we're going to go to Picketts Charge. Everybody says, man, those Confederates had to be brave to go across that field. I look at Fredericksburg, the Union attacking a stone wall, a high stone wall, Confederates 4 deep on it. They make 1 charge, 2 charge, 3, 4, 5 charges, and they don't even get within 50 yards of that. They don't give up. They go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 charges against that stone wall, and they still don't get very close to it. Now, any common sense would tell you not to go any farther. But Burnside, he's not going to give up. He sends in 11, 12, 13, 14 charges against that stone wall, and they didn't have a chance. Now, when I look at bravery, I look at those guys. Everybody who went after that 3rd charge knew they weren't going to get close. There's tales where guys would be marching into that battle, and they'd see everybody fall down. They'd think that there was a command to go down. They'd go down and find out all the rest of the guys were shot. Now, you can say, how did they have the courage to do that? Well, the problem during the Civil War, those companies were made from every little town or big town. When you're in a line, you could have your brother over here, your best friend, your cousin, your uncle in that line. If they started across that field, you were going with them. You were not going to let them go by themselves. That's why they did it. That was one of the reasons. So now the Confederates are heading across that field. Now the Union cannons can open up on them. What they did is they used canister and grape shot. Of course, they used solid shot when they're out and exploding shot. But when they got closer, those big cannons were made into gigantic shotguns. They could put looked like a metal coffee can full of balls. They'd send it down the barrel and they'd shoot it out. When they got closer, they'd put 2 of those. Some of those cans had 150 rounds in them. Could you imagine that cannon going off and 300 big balls heading towards those troops, how bad it was? They said the troops would be marching in like this, trying to protect them. You know, their arms aren't going to protect them against the bullet, but they'd be walking in with their heads down like this. So you can imagine they knew that they were walking into a lot of trouble. The thing that amazes me, well, I'll give you one more example of what happened. The 69th Pennsylvania was behind the rock wall. They have the smoothbore muskets, so they're not going to shoot at 200 yards and 100 yards. What they do is they load their smoothbore muskets with buckshot. Now, they take their ball and buck apart and they keep ramming buckshot down their barrel. They wait until the Confederates are 50 yards away. They come up from the fence and they shoot into them. Now, can you imagine? There had to be over 500 of them. There could have been 1,000 of them. But there was 500 of them. When they pulled the trigger, there was 6,000 rounds going. If there was 1,000 of them, there was 12,000 rounds going into those Confederates. So you can imagine the destruction that happened when they fired their guns. The Confederates finally do make it to the wall, and of course they're beat. The thing that amazes me is 6,000 out of the 12,000 Confederates make it back to the lee. But I'll bet you, out of that 6,000 guys, 3,000 or 4,000 of those guys were probably all wounded. Probably had some kind of a ball or buck in them. Now, basically, that's my presentation about the Battle of Gettysburg. I have some notes here about, I can't see them now, but there's a lot of good books to read, so I'm trying to inspire someone to get out there and read some Civil War books. If you're not interested in war, I would suggest Killing Lincoln. It's not like the movie. Killing Lincoln is a step-by-step process of what's happened. It's by Bill O'Reilly. It's a really good book. Oh yeah, one of my favorites, Custer Victorious. It kind of, what would you say, glorifies Custer. But I like books like that. Another book is, if you can find, The Passing of Armies by Joshua Chamberlain. Joshua Chamberlain was the general that saved the day at Little Round Top. He writes really good books. Some of the books that are later written about him, they try to criticize everything that he says, and I don't like books like that. But I would invite anybody who's slightly interested in guns to come up and look at my guns and ask me questions about them. I didn't want to make the whole presentation about guns. I kind of wanted to get as much Michigan into it. And like the Spencer rounds, the Confederates didn't have them. Why? Because they were made out of copper. With this one Spencer round, they could make 50 caps for the infantry. Where'd the copper come from? It came from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That's why we had no problem making Spencer rounds with brass cartridges. And the Confederates couldn't do it. Any questions? Yes?
When you mentioned putting the paper down the barrel and then putting the round down.
Oh, you took them.
Were those papers a nitrated paper or not at that time?
Oh, yes, they were. I couldn't think of the name.
Nitrated
It's just like a cigarette paper. It burns up when you stick it around. When an explosion goes off, there's nothing left in it.
Nothing left.
It's just for the pistols too. It's a special paper.
And the shoulder stocks that you have for the revolvers, what do they do? They just screw on with a single screw?
Yes. Now, this is what the Union used the first 2 years of the war. Because they were mainly messengers. They didn't carry guns. But as they realized they needed guns, they started making Spencers and Sharps and everything else. But this was just a glorified pistol. That's all it is.
And screwed in on the stock.
Yes. Yeah. Any more questions? Someone's got to have some. Yes.
Did they carry extra cylinders with them? Or
No, that's a big myth. That was in some of the cowboy shows that they showed those. Yes?
I've heard about the Michigan Sharpshooters
Yes,
from
they had
the Great Lakes area.
Yep,
What
yep.
kind of guns would they have used?
Okay. This is a Sharps carbine. They had later on, they first started out with muskets, but as they started making more and more of these, they made a rifle version with a longer barrel. And these were really accurate guns. And they had really good firepower. They could shoot, the muskets you could only shoot 3 rounds a minute. These you could shoot 10 rounds a minute. And that's the one you put. They also said they made linen cartridges for them. The only thing, I've never seen a linen cartridge. I assume that linen is some kind of soft cloth that would burn up. I have never seen a linen cartridge, but they made linen cartridges for those. And the reason sharpshooters used these, they had a lot better sight. You could just flip the sight up and set it for as many yards as you wanted. That was a PBS article on the sharpshooters in Michigan. That was an excellent, Any more questions? Yes?
Could you talk about the painting at all that's up there?
Okay, that's General Custer, and his men keep Spencer rifles. They're the first ones to use Spencer rifles. And this, I think, is the second day of Gettysburg. I'm not sure. But that's Custer, and I'm not in the picture. That's me there. Any more questions? Yes?
When was the Gatling gun introduced?
I don't have one. They were hardly ever used, I think, in the Civil War, but they did have them. I don't know what they did with them, and I've never heard of them being used in battle. They probably were around Washington, D.C. or something. But they did have, as far as I know, they did have them. I don't know what kind of rounds they did. I don't know. Yes?
Who made the Sharps and Spencers?
Okay, Spencer, I'll give you a little thing about Spencer. Now, he goes to the Army, Bureau of Army, whatever it is, about trying to get him to make a gun. They don't want to listen to him. He goes up to Abraham Lincoln. He goes right up to the White House. Abraham Lincoln comes out, takes the gun out in the White House yard, and shoots it. He puts a little target on. He says, "This is a good gun." Abraham Lincoln's the one who got the gun in production, and Spencer is the one who makes them.
Where were they at that time? Washington or?
Let me look. I don't have my glasses with me. I don't know. I think it just says March. Spencer repeating rifle. It might be Rochester, Pennsylvania, but I'm not sure. I can't read it. I need a magnifying glass. Any more questions? Yes?
At what point would they draw their sabers, or was there a command given at a certain point?
When Custer and the men all charge into each other, they all got to empty their pistols. After that, if everybody's still fighting, they pull out their sabers. The sabers were best used for, like, the Battle of Winchester is a big battle. Custer's there, and he sees the battle going back and forth, and he can just about tell that the Confederates are going to break. And he waits, and then he charges in with his horse. Now this, when you got the enemy fleeing, is the time to ride up with a horse and a saber. You're going to get hit on the head, or you're going to give up. And that's the best use of a saber, is retreating troops. And one of the Michigan brigades used the sword all the time. They had special, I don't know if it was the 2nd Brigade or what, but a lot of them, whenever they wanted to charge, that one group was to charge with the sabers. But it was more of a last resort. Some officers didn't like to use them. Like Buford wanted to be used as mobile infantry instead of saber charges. Any more questions? Yes?
Which revolver was preferred, the Remington or the Colt, and why?
I think whatever one you had probably is the one that, if it worked good, that's the one you liked. Now, this is a Remington. Over the years, it has this band on here, and it's a little tougher.
Backstrap.
That backstrap makes it a tougher gun. But most people, now, Morgan's Raiders are the ones that made the Colt famous, because they kept capturing them. What they would do, every time there was a battle, every time the battle was over, they'd get another gun. They'd ride into a battle with about 4 guns. They'd have guns strapped all over them, because they couldn't reload their muskets, but they could. The Union usually only had 1 gun, and the officers had another little gun for protection. But Morgan's Raiders would ride in with 4 guns. They'd have 24 shots instead of 6 shots.
Would you explain how the Remington comes apart?
Oh, sure. Now, quite easy. This looks like a reproduction, but it's a new. an old gun that's been reblued.
Yeah.
Little pin right here, you pull that pin out. Oops, I gotta hold that up just a little bit. And then your cylinder.
Is it really necessary to take the rod completely out there?
Yeah, if you want to take the cylinder out.
I thought that the rod on the Remington stays captured by the screw. And now you have the cylinder out,
Yep.
and the rod could have stayed in the gun, I do believe.
It could stay right there, but if I would have
Yeah,
dropped it, it would have
because,
fallen on the
there was
ground.
usually a capture screw in there.
Yeah, right.
And now, all you got to do is go to your belt and
Yeah.
pull out another fully loaded
But they
cylinder
didn't do that though.
and put it in there.
They didn't do that though. They didn't have extra cylinders.
Well,
It's a big myth of the Civil War
I
that
don't
they
know,
had.
I heard that that was done quite commonly.
No, no. I just read an article on it and it's, they didn't do
read
that.
articles, but this was
Yeah.
from a great-great-grandfather
Oh,
of
well,
Tommy LaFon's. and
I-
that's what they did.
I think it was, who the heck was it? Some of the cowboy shows, he has little pouches with them in there. But they say it didn't happen, but it could have. Like if you had
That was
a,
a Clint Eastwood movie.
yeah, Clint Eastwood, it was, yeah, Clint Eastwood. But, yes,
And this question, that I'm curious from an educator's point of view. How did your interest in the Civil War, when you started, and I think, if I remember, because I was with history camp this past summer, I think you said you were about in 3rd grade. Third or fourth, something.
yeah,
along
4th or
that line.
5th grade, somewhere
How
around
did
there.
how did this change your entire outlook? I mean, as far as reading and just your.
I couldn't read, I really couldn't. I was a terrible reader, I was the worst kid in the class.
But did this?
Oh yeah, this is what changed.
This is what really changed.
Yep.
What changed, and did this keep your interest?
Oh, for
as
50
you were
years. Yeah.
For over 50 years.
Yeah.
You know, how do you, as you speak to school children's groups, because I know I read an article about you speaking to I think it was the Red Yard schools.
Yeah.
What kind of response do you?
You never know. Usually the kids, if they got to be almost reading something about the Civil War. And I was at the 7th graders with Mrs. Ide's class, and the kids are really fascinated. Since we were talking about slaves and stuff, I had some big leg cuffs. All the kids had to have those leg cuffs on their leg. I'd have this kid locked up. I'd have to take it off and lock up the next kid. So they were.
So it's really interactive history that really gets them excited.
Yeah. And yes.
Do you go to many Civil War reenactments?
I don't reenact. If you have a cavalry uniform, you have to have a horse. I don't have a horse, and I'm not going to get a horse. But there are good reenactments down in Jackson, Michigan.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Yes, can you talk about that flag? Is that the Confederate flag?
This one right here is. That's the things on this side are Confederate. That's why they're
Is it
Confederate.
authentic? Is it
No,
production?
it'd be worth the thousands and thousands of dollars. I'll tell you, that's what this one is, though. Any more questions? Okay. Yes.
This might be a crazy question, but what is the militia? I heard my grandfather was Irish here in the Sioux, was in the militia. I don't know what that means.
A militia is usually a group that stayed home. It was a militia group. They protected their own town. But a lot of times in the Civil War, those militia groups did go into battle if they needed them. But a militia is usually something like that effect. It's in a town group. But I assume during the Civil War, a lot of them went into war then. Any other questions? And welcome anybody to come up and look at my stuff. You can see this stuff in the museum, but you can't pick it up. You can't pick it up.